Hello everyone and welcome back to another thrilling recap. Today we are going to recap one of the horror mystery films from 2015 titled Backtrack. Spoilers ahead. The movie unfolds with our central character, Peter, a psychologist in his mid-30s grappling with nightmares and grief following the tragic death of his daughter, for which he holds himself responsible. The opening scene features Peter overhearing his wife, Carol, in distress due to a troubling dream. Shortly after, Peter boards a bus and heads to work, seeking solace in listening to the problems of others as a distraction from his own pain. His first patient of the day is Felix, an elderly man in his 70s who seems stuck in the past. Peter, attempting to gauge Felix's mental state, poses a seemingly simple question about the current president of the United States. Initially finding the question absurd, Felix responds with Ronald Reagan. To confirm his suspicions, Peter then asks Felix the current year, to which the elderly man confidently states it's 1987. With this revelation, Peter notes down his diagnosis. It appears that Felix is suffering from amnesia. After Felix inquires if they've met before, Peter affirms that they did last week. The narrative then shifts to Peter conversing with Duncan in a separate office. Duncan is the person responsible for introducing Peter to new clients with diverse backgrounds, including Felix and others yet to come. It's revealed that Peter and his wife, Carol, are still grappling with the loss of their daughter, Evie, who passed away about a year ago. Peter experiences a poignant flashback of moments shared with Evie, culminating in the heart-wrenching discovery of her lifeless body in front of a truck. Duncan later probes Peter about what diverted his attention from Evie on the day she died. All Peter can recall is glancing inside a shop for a split second, only to find Evie on the ground in the next moment. In the following days, Peter attends to various patients in a detached manner, until a voice from one of his patients brings him back to reality. This patient is later identified as Erica. Erica questions Peter if he finds her boring, to which Peter assures her that he is indeed listening. She proceeds to share how, at times, she experiences a sense of invincibility. Later, as Peter is preparing to leave, the sound of a train passing by startles him. As he's about to exit, he notices a young girl holding a doll. Curious, Peter inquires about whom she's there to see, and she points at him. Further questioning about her parents goes unanswered, but the girl hands him a small purse with her name on it, Elizabeth Valentine. In an attempt to engage with Elizabeth, Peter asks if she can write. Strangely, the pencil on the table starts to shake, coinciding with the passing of another train. The noise startles Elizabeth, prompting Peter to close the windows. However, before he can react, Elizabeth runs out of the door. Peering out the window, Peter observes her running across the street. Upon returning home that night, Peter discovers that Elizabeth has written the number 12,787 in the book. Intrigued, he goes to the room where they keep Evie's belongings, picks up her picture, and stares at it. The next day after work, Peter is startled to find the same doll Elizabeth was holding in his office. Opening the door, he sees her gazing out the window. When he questions her about what she sees, she appears to choke and collapses. Panicked, Peter rushes to his table for medication, but when he turns back, Elizabeth is gone. The following day, Peter brings Elizabeth's doll to Duncan, hoping for some validation. However, Duncan dismisses Peter's experiences, suggesting he may be imagining everything. To challenge Peter's perceptions, Duncan asks about Evie's potential age if she were alive and inquires about Elizabeth Valentine's name. Surprisingly, Duncan's theory gains credence as the girl's initials, EV, align with Evie, Peter's late daughter. Upon returning to his office, Peter revisits Elizabeth's case paper and the paper she wrote on. Opening his desk drawer, he discovers the train pass Elizabeth had given him. Later that night, he falls asleep on the train and is startled to find one of his patients, Erica. When he wakes up, the lights go out and a surreal scene unfolds as Peter witnesses Erica's eerie figure floating in the air. Disturbed by these experiences, Peter investigates Elizabeth Valentine, only to uncover that a death certificate has already been issued for her. To his shock, he learns that most of the patients he recently attended to, including Felix and Erica, all died on the same day, July 12, 1987, the exact date Elizabeth had written on the paper. Seeking answers, Peter confides in Duncan, explaining the situation and presenting the list of deceased patients. Peter expresses doubts about his own sanity, citing inconsistencies in the unfolding events. When Duncan questions what doesn't add up, Peter's realization strikes. Duncan, the one who referred these patients, is not real. It was a figment of his imagination all along, a revelation that dawns on him when he looks into a mirror. Continuing his investigation, Peter attempts to identify the connection between all his deceased patients. He discovers a common factor: False Creek, the rail control station in the town where he grew up. The next day, Peter boards a train and heads to his hometown where his father, William, resides. Upon arriving at his father's house, Peter rings the doorbell, and William, sensing something amiss, questions Peter about his unannounced visit without his wife. In a lighthearted exchange, Peter jokes about William being the shrink, but his dad reminds him that he's a retired cop. Shortly after, Peter revisits his old room and retrieves a small box from the closet. Inside, he finds an old newspaper that captivates his attention. Leaving the house, he heads to a bar and encounters Barry, a childhood friend. They catch up, and Barry expresses sympathy for Peter's loss of his daughter, Evie. Peter, prompted by memories of Evie's death, expresses a desire to talk about the events of 1987. However, Barry reminds him of their pact never to discuss what happened. Questioning why Peter is bringing it up after all these years, he assumes that Peter wants to get the police involved. So Peter tries to explain to Barry that he has been seeing ghosts, but it pisses Barry off the most. He barks at him to stay away and leaves the bar. Meanwhile, Peter's dad walks into his room and sees the newspaper that Peter left on his bed. Afterwards, we see Peter walking on the rail track. When he starts to see his teenage years play out right in front of him, he sees two 14-year-old boys, which turns out to be Peter and Barry. They are riding bicycles along the rail track and finally stop and dump their bikes on the rail track. According to Barry, his elder brother told him that it's a makeout spot, so they hide behind a rock and watch people make out. In a nightmarish flashback, Peter and Barry hear what sounds like a woman's moan or scream while they are on the rail track. The distant horn of a train triggers their realization that they left their bikes on the track. Panicking, Peter attempts to reach the bikes, but the oncoming train is too fast. The train derails, resulting in a crash that claims the lives of all passengers. Young Peter witnesses the aftermath, recognizing some of the deceased passengers as the patients he had spoken to, including Felix and Erica. He also sees Elizabeth Valentine inside the train. As Peter starts to leave the scene, he encounters Elizabeth, and a startling encounter with Felix ensues. Felix, with a bloody face, approaches Peter, towering over him until blood falls onto Peter's face, snapping him back to reality. The next day, Barry is seen at the railway station, presumably dealing with the aftermath. Peter, grappling with guilt, decides to confess at the police station, but lies about being the sole culprit. He confesses to Barbara, a female cop, who asks if he ever mentioned it to his father, a sergeant at the time. Peter denies it, and Barbara, visibly upset, excuses herself briefly. Peter learns that Erica, one of the patients he attended to, was a victim of the train wreck, and Barbara is Erica's daughter. Apologizing, Peter expresses remorse, and Barbara appreciates his honesty, assuring him that she will file an official report. She shares that Peter's father had shown kindness to her after the train accident, inspiring her to become a cop. Returning home, Peter hears a sound from his room and investigates. He begins to hear Elizabeth humming, and upon entering his closet, the door slams shut behind him. Ominous throat croaks fill the air, and suddenly, Elizabeth jumps on him, screaming in his face. In reality, Peter wakes up to Duncan pointing a flashlight at him. Peter tells Duncan that he has told the truth and put it to rest, to which Duncan asks why they are still there. Duncan adds that it's impossible for two small bikes to derail a train, suggesting that Peter's mind is trying to change the truth because it's unacceptable. Duncan also says that Peter doesn't even remember the way his daughter died. Peter then has a flashback of the day Evie died and remembers what caught his attention. It was a toy train station in a shop. With that, he wakes up. Meanwhile, Barbara is going through the case files from the train wreck. 1987. In one of the pictures, she sees William doing his job, and strangely, young Peter is at the train wreck scene too. Later that day, Peter visits the rail track again and is trying very hard to remember what exactly happened that night. He remembers running in the woods and also remembers seeing a hand pull the controls in the signal box. Immediately after that memory hits him, he approaches the signal box by the rail track. He goes upstairs and stands in front of the door when the door opens, only for Peter to see Barry's lifeless body hanging from the ceiling. When the cops arrive at the scene, Peter has no choice but to confess to Barbara that Barry also left his bike on the rail track. In the meantime, one of the police officers in the signal box finds a badge on the floor. When Peter gets home, he takes a closer look at the newspaper and finds out that Elizabeth Valentine was missing before the accident. He then remembers seeing Elizabeth running in the woods at the police station. The police officer who found the badge gives it to Barbara right before Peter shows up at the office. He tells her that he thinks Elizabeth wasn't on the train because he remembers seeing her running from a car just before the accident. Barbara asks Peter how he knows what Elizabeth looks like, so he explains that he sees the ghosts of the victims from the accident and asks her to help him. Seeing that Barbara doesn't believe him, Peter tries to describe her mom, Erica. He says that she has a British accent and that she calls her Benny. This confuses the cop, and she asks Peter to go home because he's not helping. When he gets into the car, he finds Elizabeth's doll on the passenger seat, and instead of driving home, he drives into the woods where he remembers seeing her. He stops the car in the middle of the woods and begs Elizabeth to show him what happened that night. Suddenly, an invisible hand hits the car's window, and when Peter looks ahead, he sees Elizabeth. She gestures to him to come along, and he does as she says. Back at the police station, Barbara takes out the badge that the police officer gave her earlier. She sees that the badge has the same name as the school Elizabeth attended, and so she rushes to find Elizabeth's case file and sees that the case was closed at the same time. Peter follows Elizabeth until he can see the railway signal box from afar. By this time, Barbara drives to William's house and asks him if he can talk, and he invites her in. Barbara tells William that she pulled out his old report from the train crash. William tells Barbara that she is taking it too personally because she lost her mom, but she says she doesn't think it happened the way Peter explained it, that two bikes were mistakenly left on a train track. In the case file statement, William states that he received a call at the police station and he proceeded to drive to the accident. He says he took the only available road, which is Oakstone. But Barbara points out that it would be impossible to drive through that road because the road was completely blocked by the wreckage. She says that the only way he could have driven across the tracks if he was at the scene before the accident. She then shows him the badge they found in the signal box and says that she's sure it belongs to Elizabeth Valentine, missing school drill. William was in charge of Elizabeth's case, but he closed the case after he found her body in the wreckage. However, out of all the bodies found, hers was the only inconclusive cause of death, and Barbara thinks Peter saw something that night. Meanwhile, at the signal box, Peter finally remembers exactly how things played out. That night, he saw a girl running from a car. When young Peter hears the scream from the signal box, he goes to check it out. Peter sees Elizabeth being choked and raped from behind by his father. And it also turns out that Elizabeth pulls a pedal that causes the train to immediately derail. After the train derails, William murders Elizabeth and puts her body in the train wreckage. Young Peter saw it all happen at William's house. Barbara says she'll wait for Peter and William asks her if she wants a cup of tea, but she says no. Barbara feels like William is about to play a fast one, so she reaches for her gun just in case, and then he hits her on the head. William drives her car inside his garage and throws her in the trunk. Not long after, Peter arrives, just in time to see his dad at the garage, and reveals to William that he remembers everything. Peter asks his dad what he has done, and then William pulls a gun at Peter. He orders Peter to get in the garage, and Peter does just that. The son asks William how he feels about letting him live with the guilt all these years and how many other girls he killed. When William is distracted for a second, Peter uses the opportunity to fight him off. But unfortunately, William gets hold of a tool on the floor and hits Peter with it, causing the son to fall unconscious before dawn the following morning. William drives across town with Barbara in the trunk and Peter in the seat. Suddenly, William sees Elizabeth in the middle of the road and loses control of the steering. He drives off the road, and Peter falls out of the car, still unconscious in the process. The car ends up on the rail track, and William tries to start the car, but it doesn't come on. Suddenly, all the doors of the car lock on their own, and William struggles to get it open, but it doesn't work. He is terrified when he sees a monstrous-looking Elizabeth in the mirror, and he hears the horn of a train from afar. Peter wakes up in time and sees the train approaching, so he immediately picks up the father's gun and starts to shoot to break the windows open. He succeeds in shooting the car trunk open, and Barbara gets out of the car. However, when William tries to get out, Elizabeth appears and pulls him back in. Peter can see all the victims of the accident again, and they slowly disappear. When he's about to leave, he sees Elizabeth Valentine one last time, and this time, she looks pretty peaceful as she walks away. Days later, we see Peter sitting at the beach with Evie, who gives him a peck on the forehead before she walks into the ocean, finally moving on and at peace. What part of the movie intrigued you the most, and why? Make sure to comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.